Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
SOS, save our students paying rent for accommodation they can't use. Chris in Surbiton, this touches one of your family. Is that right, Chris?
Yeah, that's correct, Nick. Yeah, hi. Great show, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
First-time caller.
Oh, thank you,
Been listening
sir.
for years.
Oh, thank you, sir.
She basically went up to Birmingham Uni,
Yep.
worked for a concert merchandise company,
Yes.
on a 0-hour contract.
Oh, Lord,
got
right.
a first in her uni work. Has come down to Kings, rented a flat in Brixton Hill.
Right.
And basically, is in the creek without a paddle, to be honest.
So tell me what this is. Is she paying rent for accommodation then she can't use?
She is, yeah,
Right.
yeah, 600. She has to pay. She shares with a couple of other girls, and she has to pay £600 a month.
And when did this start and when was she last in it?
She basically went up just before Christmas when everything changed again, when Boris decided to change everything again, and that everyone disappeared on the trains up north or wherever they were going.
So I'm just trying to
there.
clarify. How has she lived in the property at all for any period of time?
Yeah, probably a couple of months.
But she's had to pay what for December and obviously for this month, January, and she's not getting anything.
Exactly. And
Right.
I spoke to her the other day, and she's beside herself because
That's a lot of
she's
money.
so down about it all.
Yeah.
She just wants. She's such a star and just wants to do so well, you know.
Yeah. So where's she living now?
She went up. She hasn't seen her boyfriend for 2 months because she was isolated and didn't want to go from the
Right.
flat in Brixton Hill. So she's gone back up to Birmingham, living with her boyfriend.
With her boyfriend, I see. Okay.
And his family. So
And has she sought to explain to the landlords or the company that owns the property in Brixton or not?
well, I'm not sure, but she's just. I mean, there's no help for her. She's
No.
on a 0-hour contract up in Birmingham, and
And she's having to pay £600 a month for a room that she's not using.
she's getting no help with her work.
No.
She's works at a bar in Mayfair.
Right.
She can't be furloughed because she joined just too late, and there's just no help. She's had no help whatsoever.
Chris, I am sorry. That is really, really tough for your daughter. There is no consolation in saying she's not the only one. That doesn't help her at all. But it is the case. Give her my best. Chris, thank you for calling us a first time. And Maxine in Hackney, what's the situation with you? Good morning.
Hi, Nick. My son basically got made redundant from his apprenticeship. He was doing engineering. 2 years into a 4-year apprenticeship. So then he decided to start university. And my issue is that he's been at university, he's paying the full whack, but he's not getting the full... It's a practical course.
Right.
And he's sat at home on a computer, and these chancellors down at the university are charging him the full money, and he's sat at home.
And sorry,
He hasn't had a practical...
sorry,
Yeah,
I
go
didn't.
on.
Did you say? I'm so sorry. Did you say what he's studying? I didn't pick it up.
He's doing engineering, which
Right.
is obviously a practical subject.
Right.
He hasn't had a practical lesson yet because he's been sat at home on Zoom.
Sorry. So even last year, did he start last year? Is that correct?
No, he started in September. Yeah, in
Yes,
September.
started last year. He's had even last year he didn't physically get to have any tutorials.
He went in for the induction when the rules were a bit more relaxed. And then basically, he's been sat in here, apart from the induction,
Yes.
a social distance induction, he's been sat on the computer, and it's a practical subject.
And lastly, he's presumably paying for accommodation somewhere, is he, your son?
Yes, he's fine. He's fine with accommodation, but like I said, Nick, it's not for me. For my son, it's not the accommodation. It's the fact that they're charging full money for a course that he's not getting the full benefit of. It's a practical subject.
I can imagine. Again, what can I say? There. It doesn't make it better. There are so many young people like your son, Maxine. Thank you. I do sense there will be pressure building. Pressure building on the government to try and resolve this. We'll come back to this in a moment. Let's go to other matters and reflect, of course, what was very much top of the news agenda yesterday and is still right up there today, second probably only to the rollout of the vaccine, which are the horrific sights witnessed, of course, in and around the Capitol in Washington. And one of the targets, one could argue, because of the irresponsible language from outgoing President Donald Trump, is the Democrat Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. And pictures have now come out which show some Trump supporters, Richard Big O Barnett from Arkansas, pictured sitting at Nancy Pelosi's desk, Adam Johnson, another supporter, grinning as he makes off with a lectern that I believe belongs to the Speaker. Other pictures were taken, stationary as well, with one person saying, "Well, I left a quarter, I was entitled to her stationery." Let's bring into the conversation someone who served as a Conservative MP for, I think, around 20 plus years, and Speaker of the House of Commons from 2009 to 2019. I speak of John Bercow, who joins me now. I would imagine you had a close professional relationship with Nancy Pelosi. How do you react to the events of the last couple of days? Mr. Bercow, good morning.
Nick, good morning to you. I'm horrified and disgusted by those events, though I have, in all candor, to say that I'm not greatly surprised by them. Nancy Pelosi is somebody with whom I did indeed have a good and strong, very cordial professional relationship. She represents the very best of American democracy. The notion that her office should be subject to trespass, should be overtaken, should be defiled, and that somebody should have the sheer effrontery to claim the right to engage in that behavior is abominable. And I think right-thinking people of all political persuasions and of none will come together in horror and justified execration of what's happened in the United States. I'm afraid it's the culmination of a sequence of events, of a mindset, of a type of behavior demonstrated by President Trump over the last 4 years. So I'm sorry to say I told you so, but a lot of people said over a very long period that this was no normal president of the United States. This was a president unbelievably, almost indescribably narcissistic, obsessed with himself, utterly disrespectful of anybody who held an opinion that differed from his own, and inclined ultimately to turn on everybody. He should, of course, be chucked out of office, and if he isn't chucked out of office before his due departure date, I very much hope, in the interests of American democracy and of adherence to principle, that he will be impeached, but we'll have to see.
A former friend has been fairly open in condemnation. I speak of Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Did he go far enough, in your view, yesterday, Mr. Bercow?
Well, it's a start. I think he could have gone further.
I'll take that as a no then, Mr. Bercow.
Well, I think that he was a bit slow about it. I think what the Prime Minister said yesterday was welcome, and I respect that. But I think that he took too long about it. And I think that the truth of the matter is that over a period of years, members of the Conservative government were very much inclined and extremely keen to pay homage to President Trump. And some aspects of the Trump playbook have been replicated in the United Kingdom. Not the most extreme elements, I hasten to add. But I think it's most unfortunate that Michael Gove rushed to interview President Trump. Jacob Rees-Mogg said that if he were an American citizen, he would have voted for President Trump. In 2018, Boris Johnson said he thought that Donald Trump could be a contender for the Nobel Peace Prize. This man is, let us be clear, a reckless and irresponsible racist demagogue. That is the reality of President Trump. And you know, Nick, very well, whether it suits you on your show this morning to say so is for you to judge, that all too many Conservative parliamentarians and members of the British media were very keen to celebrate Trump, to laud Trump, to magnify Trump. And I remember back in 2017 when I objected to the idea that President Trump should be invited to address a session of both houses of Parliament in Westminster, that the right-wing media were very quick to flay and vilify me. I was right about that, and those who attacked me were wrong.
Hold on, I was one of those, and I did criticise you, but my argument was...
I wasn't aware of that important fact, Nick. I'm sure it was very important to you, but I wasn't aware that you were in the lead on these matters.
I don't want my listeners to think in any way that I would misrepresent myself when confronted by that, because I did. But my argument was, Mr. Bercow, you have to show respect to the office of the president, not necessarily the current inhabitant. Do you at least see my line of argument?
I do see that line of argument, but I suppose what I would say in response, Nick, is that there is no unbreakable convention that all presidents and prime ministers from visiting countries are invited to address sessions of both houses of Parliament at Westminster. Some have been invited, far more have not been. And even if you think about the United States, the reality is that President Reagan addressed both houses of Parliament in the Royal Gallery, but not in the most prestigious setting of Westminster Hall. George W. Bush didn't address a session of both houses of parliament at all. Barack Obama did, but he did so 2.5 years into office, a respected and widely liked American president and the first black president of the United States. My critique of the enthusiasm for inviting President Trump was based A, on his racism and sexism, and B, on the fact that he'd only weeks before been elected to office. Now, I think that those important niceties, those details and intricacies of the debate might, I don't want to be uncharitable, Nick, they might have escaped the attention of Mr. Nicholas Ferrari.
Coming back to Donald J. Trump...
You're being too shy, Nick. Own up to the extent of your misdemeanor.
There are so many misdemeanors. I would need to go all the way until Eddie Mayer took over control in about 6 hours' time. John Bercow, you talk about what we've witnessed in the United States. Was this, to use an Americanism, was this always part of his game plan? Was this in his playbook all along, having lost?
Well, it's very difficult to penetrate the inner recesses of the Trumpian mind, as it's a somewhat abnormal mind, Nick. But, you put me on the spot and asked me the question. I suspect so. I mean, it may be that it just occurred over a period, that he was fired up, fortified and enabled by some of the really weird, fringe, extreme, eccentric characters by whom he was surrounding himself in the last few weeks, and that therefore it came upon him and wasn't part of a long charted game plan. My hunch is that the clue is in what he said several months ago. He was asked whether he would consent to a peaceful transfer of power if he lost, and he refused to give that commitment. So my hunch is that all along, he might not have thought of the exact details, but all along he was taking that attitude, l'État, c'est moi. The state, it's me. I am American democracy. No fair election can possibly result in my defeat, and therefore, if I lose, it must be as a result of impropriety, unfairness, corruption, or whatever. Now, that is an attitude that is the very antithesis of the attitude of a democratic politician. George Bush Sr. graciously accepted defeat. If you go back further, Nixon accepted defeat to Kennedy in 1960. Mitt Romney accepted defeat at the hands of Barack Obama and so on. The trouble with this president is it's all about him, whereas public service at its height should be just that, about the public, the service, doing the right thing. And that has to include not just rejoicing in one's victory, but accepting one's periodic defeat.
Now, this, just to tell everybody, we're going to be late to the news. Nothing's really changed. Everything's in the hands of the military now. Please God that the great men and women of our army and military bring the vaccinations through. We'll update you on the news in a moment, because I'm enjoying my time with former Speaker John Bercow. Mr. Bercow, you talk about President Trump.
You can't call me John, Nick. I always call you Nick. I'm a friendly sort of bloke.
Well, OK then, John. You speak about a sense of narcissism. You speak about it being all about him. Some might say, Mr. Bercow, you exhibited some of that in your role as Speaker.
Well, I tried to do the right thing by Parliament. I mean, I'm very happy to be judged, and some people will judge me in a positive way and other people would judge me in a negative way. But I hope you would accept, Nick, and I hope that your listeners would accept that for over 10 years as Speaker, I did the job. I worked extremely hard. I was always keen to be in the chamber, to sit there hour after hour after hour. I did more than my allotted time in the chair. I thought, well, I'd rather be accused of hogging the chair than of being an absentee landlord. And so whether I was a good speaker or not is for other people to judge. Nobody can be judged in his or her own cause. But I tried to do the right thing by Parliament, by the public, and by my constituents.
Bar Donald Trump and the issues we say there, we might be talking more about the United Kingdom and Brexit. It's now, of course, 8 days since Britain fully Brexited and has a trade deal. And fortunately, goods are flowing at Dover both ways across the Channel. We're going to be OK, aren't we, John?
I hope so, but I think it's very early days and I'm not yet convinced. You would think me a very strange character indeed, Nick, if I suddenly turned tail and said, oh, I think Brexit's an absolutely marvellous idea.
Be a hell of a story, John.
Such inconsistency, such unreliability, such unpredictability. You were saying something else only a matter of weeks ago. My own personal view is that Brexit is the most colossal foreign policy blunder of the post-war period.
But Boris has pulled it off, John. Boris has he got his deal.
Yes, he did get a deal, and getting a deal is much better than having an ejection from the union with no deal. So I readily acknowledge that, but it is a pretty thin skeletal.
Oh, I thought you were going with thin gruel there for a minute.
Well, I think it is thin gruel, Nick, and of course you will know, because I'm sure you're a very keen student of these matters, and I'm sure you will have poured through the minutiae of the deal.
Yes.
And, as a result of the hot, wet towel over your head overnight, and the product of your lucubrations will be that you're very familiar with all of the detail. You'll know that there are enormous numbers of matters that have still to be debated and negotiated, potentially for months or even years to come. And as far as services, which are such an important part of the UK economy, well, there is no deal in relation to services. So I hope that it's better than I fear. But my fear is that we will be poorer, we will be more insecure, and we will be less influential in the world than if we had remained part of the Union. But do I hope I'm wrong in the interests of the United Kingdom? I do hope I'm wrong in the interests of the United Kingdom, but it's very early days, and it's far too early, Nick, for you to pat yourself on the back, which I'm sure you wouldn't want to do, and to say, Nick Ferrari, was right about Brexit. You're entitled to your opinion, but in my opinion, you suffer from the material disadvantage of being completely wrong.
Last couple of points. You talk about me being a student of that. You are closer to academe than I, John. You're, as I understand, Chancellor of the University of Essex and the University of Bedfordshire. Do you have sympathy for the plight in which many students currently find themselves, in that they cannot attend courses, nor in some instances can they go to accommodation they're paying for?
Yes, I'm very sympathetic to them. Each institution will have to fashion its own course, but if you ask me, do I empathise with students? I absolutely do empathise with students. I was a student at the University of Essex myself. It's an experience that I found enriching and fulfilling, and for which I'll always be grateful. I love my old university, and I'm in very regular contact with it. They've got to make the executive decisions that they think are right, but students have a voice, and that voice must be heard. And I completely understand why students at the moment feel utterly bereft. They're not getting the full deal that they would get were it not for the pandemic. So
do they deserve a refund, John? Do they deserve a refund?
Well, I certainly think that they should get what they pay for. And if they're not getting what they pay for, they're bound to lament that, they're bound to protest about that, and that has to be the subject of negotiation. It's not for me to sit here now and say precisely what the policy of an individual university should be, but am I aware of the issue? I'm very sympathetic.
Yeah, so
I'm not the Chancellor of the University of Bedfordshire, actually, anymore. I was Chancellor of that university for 5.5 years, and I fulfilled my term. But you're quite right, Nick. You are at least half right, and I congratulate you.
Well, that's quite a record for me. My dear God, I don't know.
Nick, it's a notable accomplishment. I am Chancellor of the University of Essex. I'm very sympathetic to its students, and I hope they get a fair deal. And you're quite right to challenge me on that important point, and you have done so.
Prior to rising to the height of Speaker, you were a long-serving MP.
My height is not a very great height, it has to be said.
The political height. Were you still in the House, what question would you ask of the Prime Minister or the Health Secretary or whoever about the way they've handled the COVID or so-called pandemic crisis? What would you seek to know?
I would seek to know how the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State for Health intend to meet the laudable commitment speedily to roll out the vaccine, so that in the course of 2021, the British economy can get fully back to work, the public can be safe, and normal service, if you like, educationally and professionally, can be resumed. I respect the Prime Minister's ambition to make it happen. He is naturally an optimist, and I don't criticise him for that. But how in practical terms, in terms of the logistics and the can do and the make happen, is it going to work? I think that would be my inquiry. And Nick, I rather suspect it would be the inquiry of very large numbers of people across the country. Nobody wants to be in this position. The question is how in practical terms, not by sloganising or empty promises, how in practical terms are we going to deliver the exit from COVID-19?
Do you think he'll pull it off?
I think that we will come out of this morass eventually. Whether the government will be able to meet its timetable, I think is genuinely uncertain. I earnestly hope that the Prime Minister and his government will be able to do so. I wish them well, not least for the benefit of the public that they're there to serve. But if you're asking me, would I bet my house on it? I'm more cautious than that. Now, it may be that you are a daring or perhaps even calculating gambler, and that you would bet the vast Ferrari property empire
Who's been talking?
on the success of the administration. And if so, I think now is the opportunity, Nick, for you boldly to declare that you will risk all of your assets because of your limitless faith in the Johnson administration.
Lastly, another, you know where I'm going now, another honours list came round, John, and you were omitted again. I believe you to be the first speaker in more than 200 years not to be offered a seat in the House of Lords. How much does it hurt?
Well, I don't sit awake at nights worrying about it, is the answer to that. There has been a convention that the outgoing speaker has gone to the House of Lords. It may happen, it may not happen. But look, I'm not spending time worrying about myself. There are a lot of people in a lot less fortunate positions than I. It was an enormous privilege to serve as Speaker. I loved it. I did the job to the best of my ability, and I'm now making a living in other ways and trying to support my family and do what I think is the right thing. And it is an absolute joy and privilege to come on your programme, Nick. And I would like, A, to wish you a Happy New Year,
and to you.
And B, to thank you for having me on your programme.
Happy
and
New Year to you.
To thank you for calling me John.
Happy New Year to you and to your family. And I tell you what, John, let's speak again in another month or so when Brexit's really progressing well. John, what say you?
Well, we'll see. We'll see. I might take you up on your generous offer.
Thanks for your time. Best wishes to your family. Thank you, John Bercow, former Speaker of the House of Commons, speaking principally, of course, about events in the United States. We'll give you a news bulletin in a couple of minutes. Let's come back to our conversation concerning, and thank you to people who've held on. Caitlin and Barnet, you are a student. Let's come back to that conversation. You're a student. What sort of problems do you find yourself in as regards tuition or accommodation? Good morning.
Morning. I'm a third-year law student at the University of Manchester, and a number of colleagues and myself have been talking recently, and we've worked out that obviously at the end of our 3-year degree, we'll be in a debt tuition-wise of £27,750.
Yeah.